When the first rain of the season fell, it struck the earth like 1,000 quiet drums. The plains were vast and dangerous, ruled by beasts whose shadows could cover an entire camp. Their horns were like curved spears of the gods, their hides thick as bark, their eyes burning with the slow awareness of something that had never known fear. The people who lived beneath their tread were small and fragile things, thin-limbed, dark-skinned, clever-eyed. But where the giants had muscle, the people had thought. And thought, in this cold and hungry age, was a new kind of weapon. Karr, the young hunter, came home one evening with blood dried on his face and a great boar's head slung over his shoulder. The tusks were long as his forearm, chipped at the ends from battle. His people gathered close, awed, but also afraid. They knew that where one giant fell, another would come searching. The elder woman, Luma, her hair white as ashes, asked him where the kill had been made. Karr told her near the river bend, where the reeds grew thick. The boar had charged him, but he had seen the way the wind turned its scent, the way the animal's feet slipped on wet soil. He had waited, moved sideways, and struck at the right moment. But as he spoke, his voice faltered. He had seen larger shadows near the horizon. Herds were moving differently. The giants were restless. The fire crackled, throwing strange shapes against the walls of their rough shelters. Luma listened without speaking, then finally said, "You killed one beast, but the land gives us more than one. If they come again, you cannot face them with just a spear. You must make the land itself your weapon." The next morning, Karr and a handful of hunters followed her to the valley beyond the river. It was a harsh place, a wide basin of rock and clay they called the bone shelf, because every year bones collected their skulls, ribs, spines, remnants of beasts that had fallen or been trapped by the changing ground. The air smelled of salt and dust. Luma gestured to the broken terrain. "This is what kills giants," she said. "The earth is patient. We must learn from it." They began to watch the beasts with new eyes. Mammoths came down to drink at dawn, their tusks tracing arcs through the mist. Enormous rhinoceroses grazed the lower marsh, flinging mud with their horns. Herds of wild horses stampeded in lines so straight it seemed the earth itself guided them. The hunters learned to read patterns, where the beasts rested, where they turned when startled, how they moved in herds. Knowledge became their first strategy. They marked the wind by burning herbs, tracked the distance of thunder to know when the soil would soften enough to trap hooves. The land itself became a weapon of memory. They began to experiment, nets woven from sinew and vine, pits camouflaged with leaves. Spears hardened in fire. Some attempts failed. A pit collapsed as soon, a net snapped and caught one of their own. They buried the dead quietly and studied every mistake. Slowly, the failures shaped their minds. They learned that traps must not only catch, but confuse, that beasts should be made to choose wrongly, to step where the ground would betray them. Luma's voice echoed in every lesson. Make them choose their weight. When the winter came, the herds grew desperate. Food was scarce. The hunters decided to try their first great trap. A herd of shaggy bulls had come down the river, led by a bull with horns like half-moons. The plan was to drive them toward the bend where the river curved and narrowed. Across the shallows, they stretched a hidden barrier, a thick, bone-reinforced net tied between trees and anchored to buried stakes. If the herd could be made to stampede toward it, their speed would become their downfall. Karr and Tarek, his closest friend, crept close to the herd before dawn. The air was silver with fog. They clattered stones together, made the sounds of frightened deer. The bulls turned, snorting, and began to run. The earth trembled. Karr's heart hammered in his chest as he sprinted back toward the river, the sound of a dozen giants thundering behind him. The plan worked almost too well. The herd charged into the curve, and the first bull struck the hidden net. The weight of its body pulled the stakes tight. The net rose and tangled its legs. One fell, then another. Panic spread through the herd. Mud churned, air filled with screams. The hunters sprang from hiding, spears flashing in the gray light. It was chaos. One man was crushed beneath a hoof before anyone could pull him free. Another's ribs were broken by a thrashing horn. But the beasts went down, one by one, until the shallows were red with blood and foam. The survivors fled, limping toward the horizon. When the silence came, it was heavy and strange. Karr stood shaking, watching the bodies of the fallen beasts steam in the cold air. They had done it. They had brought down giants. The tribe feasted that night, but their joy was tempered. They had learned that every victory cost something. Around the fire, Luma told them this was only the beginning. The beasts would grow wary. They would change their paths. The hunters would have to change faster. Spring came with the scent of green shoots and thawing earth. Along the edge of the cliffs, mammoths roamed again. One day, Tarek spotted a massive bull feeding near a narrow ridge that dropped sharply into a rocky ravine. He studied the terrain, then called for Karr and Luma. The cliff could be their ally. If they could frighten the mammoth into losing its footing, the fall would do what no spear could. They spent 3 days preparing. Small fires were lit in a circle behind the ridge, enough to send smoke but not to burn. Decoys made of hide and bone were placed to distract the beast. Spears were planted in the ground, their tips gleaming faintly in the sun. At dawn, the plan was set into motion. The mammoth, disturbed by the smoke, lifted its great head and trumpeted, stamping the ground. Karr stepped into view, waving a torch, shouting. The beast turned toward him. He ran sideways, leading it along the ridge. Its feet struck loose stones. The ground shifted. There was a sound like thunder splitting the sky, and then the mammoth's bulk lurched forward. The earth cracked beneath its weight. For one heartbeat it hung there, half over the edge, before tumbling into the ravine below. The crash echoed for miles. The hunters stood in stunned silence. The air smelled of smoke, dust, and triumph. They descended carefully, cutting into the carcass with reverent hands. They used everything, the hide for tents, the bones for tools, the fat for fire. Luma placed a palm on the mammoth's flank and murmured words of respect. They had killed a god of the plains, and even victory felt sacred. But not all beasts could be tricked by cliffs or nets. In the warmer months, a great woolly rhinoceros began to haunt the marshland where the tribe gathered reeds. It was larger than any they had seen before, its horn long and curved like a scythe. When it charged, trees split in two. Spears shattered against its hide. The people were trapped in fear. Karr and Tarek watched the beast for weeks, noticing its rhythm. It could only charge for short bursts before growing exhausted. It relied on fury, not endurance. That was its weakness. They devised a new hunt not of speed, but of patience. The hunters would not strike immediately. They would run the beast in circles until its rage burned itself out. On the chosen day, they began at dawn, taunting the rhino from a distance, shouting and throwing stones. It charged, bellowing, its horn cutting the air. But each time it neared, the hunter split and fled in two directions, forcing it to turn sharply. The mud slowed it. Hours passed. The beast's breath became ragged, its movements slower. When at last it stumbled, the hunters moved in, striking at its knees, its sides, avoiding the deadly horn. The rhino went down slowly, like a collapsing wall. When it was done, they stood over it in weary triumph. Their methods grew into rituals. The young learned to weave nets, to whistle signals, to read wind. Fire became a tool of guidance rather than destruction. They painted their spears with marks to communicate, lines for direction, feathers for commands. At night, they told stories not just of kills, but of lessons. How to use the earth as patience, how to move together like water around stone. They began to see themselves not as solitary hunters, but as one creature with many hands. But even wisdom could not save them from the cruelty of nature. A winter harsher than any before descended upon the plains. Snow lay deep, and hunger crept into their bones. Then, one morning, they saw a female mammoth and her calf near the frozen river. The mother dug through the snow with her trunk, desperate to find grass. The calf stumbled, weak and small. The tribe watched in silence. They needed meat, fat, and hide to survive. But none wished to face the wrath of a mother defending her young. Luma, older now, her face lined with years of frost and grief, spoke softly. "We cannot fight her strength," she said, "but we can turn her heart, make her choose." The plan was cruel, but survival often was. They set decoys in the forest, scattered food far from the river, and built small fires to draw the wolves' attention away from the mammoth. As the mother sensed danger, she moved to protect her calf. In doing so, she wandered toward the cliffed valley where the snow was thin and the rocks unstable. The ground betrayed her. With a cracking sound like a breaking tree, her hind foot slipped. The ice gave way. She fell halfway into a hollow pit lined with stone. Her trumpet filled the valley, long and mournful. The hunters approached cautiously, spears ready but hearts heavy. They did not cheer when she died. They worked in silence, taking what they needed. The calf was spared, fed for a few days on melted snow and soft grass, but one morning it was gone, vanished into the wild, perhaps to join another herd. Luma buried a piece of the mother's tusk in the riverbank, whispering prayers that sounded older than language. Seasons turned, the band grew stronger, their hunts more precise. But new dangers came, not from beasts, but from other humans. A rival group followed their trails, stealing kills, setting fires to flush game toward their own traps. One night, under the red light of the moon, they attacked. Arrows flew, the air filled with the hiss of burning reeds. Karr rallied his people, using the same strategies they had once used on beasts. They made false fires, dug shallow pits, laid branches to snap underfoot. When the attackers advanced, thinking they had the advantage, they fell into chaos. The defending tribe fought like the earth itself, silent, shifting, coordinated. When dawn broke, the invaders had fled, leaving behind broken weapons and blood. Victory came not from strength, but from unity. They had learned to make their minds the sharpest tools they possessed. Years passed, and the children who once watched from the shadows grew into hunters themselves. They carved the stories of their hunts into bark and bone, simple drawings of cliffs, nets, and the swirling lines that meant drive them here. Those carvings became their written memory. The tribe learned to balance their power with reverence. They took only what they needed. When they killed, they sang. When they survived, they remembered. But time has a way of humbling all creatures. The herds began to thin. Some beasts moved north where the ice retreated, others vanished entirely. The hunters wandered farther and farther from their home valleys, carrying with them the wisdom of generations. Karr, now old and slow, would sit by the river at dusk watching his grandchildren play. One of them, a curious girl with eyes like polished stone, once asked, "Why did we have to kill the giants? Could we not have lived beside them?" Karr smiled, though his eyes were heavy. "Because the world does not give," he said. "It tests. The beasts were not our enemies. They were our teachers. They showed us how to think, how to plan, how to become more than what we were." He told her about the first nets, the first traps, the first time they had understood that the land could be shaped by intention. "The giants taught us what fear is," he said, "and from fear we made courage. From hunger we made invention. When they fell, we learned the weight of what it means to take a life." The girl frowned. "And was it fair?" He laughed softly. "Fairness is a story we tell when we are full. In hunger, there is only balance. We kill so that we may live, but we remember so that we do not become monsters." When he died, the tribe placed his bones near the bone shelf, among the giants he had once hunted. Years later, wanderers would find that place littered with bones carved in strange symbols, marks of learning, memory, and respect. To them, it would look like art. To the people who came after, it was scripture written in ivory. The world changed, forests rose where plains had been. The giants vanished, leaving only shadows in the stories of those who remembered. But the legacy of the hunters lived on in the human mind, the instinct to plan, to adapt, to turn the strength of the world into strategy. Their courage and cunning had shaped not just their survival, but the essence of what humanity would become. Because every hunt, every loss, every giant that fell taught the same eternal truth, that the earth itself is a living thing, and those who wish to live upon it must learn to think as it does, slowly, deeply, with patience and purpose. The beasts had ruled through power, the humans would rule through mind. And from that long, terrible struggle between muscle and thought, the first spark of civilization was born. Even now, the ground remembers the thunder of hooves, the echo of spears, the prayers whispered into the bones of fallen giants. And in that memory lies the story of how humanity learned to survive a world too large for mercy and too beautiful to leave unconquered.